Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. We are doing another one of the realistic expectation episodes, this time on little babies. Now, I don't know if anyone else calls this age little babies, the 4 or 5, 3, 6 month olds, this kind of out of the fourth trimester. That's like a real term, right? Like everybody uses the fourth trimester, out of the newborn phase. But they're not older babies, which is 6 to 12 months. That'll be another episode. I kind of feel like they're this in between, right? They are not a newborn. We're not in fourth trimester. They're noticeably different, but they're also not an older baby. So I call them little babies. I don't know if you're a professional listening to this podcast and you want to tell me what you kind of call this 3 to 6 month age group. I would love to hear. I'm curious, for real. This is an interesting age group, right? Because of their in-betweenness, whatever, because they are in the between. A lot of times we are also in between as parents. We are still expecting them sometimes to be like newborns in some ways and expecting them to be like older babies in other ways. And so it's a very tricky time in some ways for sleep, just in and of itself, developmentally. And then in some ways, it's a very tricky time for sleep because we're either a step behind or a step ahead of them, which happens. It happens in parenting all the time. So nothing to be worried about, but it is. It's something that definitely happens, especially when we hear so many messages about what they should be doing, or we've maybe gotten used to something the way it is and it's changed and we haven't quite caught up. So I think the theme of this age to me is they are more aware and engaged in the world around them, right? Whereas a newborn kind of has this filter. You can almost take them anywhere. These babies are just more engaged. They're more interactive. They're fun. They found their hands. They found their they're beginning to work on controlling their limbs. They're starting to learn to roll. They found their babble, and they're just so cute and fun and interactive. And with this being more engaged, they're also more nosy and distractible. And we see this with feeding and we see this with sleep. And you had the baby that would lovely nurse anywhere, and all of a sudden they're like, nurse, nurse, nurse. Hey, wait, what's over there? Right? Nurse, just, wait, what's over there? And you're left completely exposed. Excuse me, baby. Or we had the baby that was easy to settle in stimulating environments. And now all of a sudden I'd be like, what's going on? Right? And maybe needs less stimulation around them in order to go to sleep. And, of course, as with everything, not all babies, right? There's such a wide range of normal, but this does seem to be a theme with this age. Another big theme with this age is that they need less sleep. And they need noticeably less sleep during the day, right? So they're able to be awake longer. So we're seeing fewer naps. The naps are spread further apart. And they are needing less overall daytime sleep. And so they have a big kind of reduction in daytime sleep. So the newborns were 14 to 17 hours. This age is often in the 13 to 15 hours. So that could be 2 hours less sleep. And these are, population data, of course. But I find this is often where parents are a step behind, where you still can be expecting them to be sleeping the same amount during the day as they were maybe, 2-3 months. When they're actually ready to be awake longer, build more sleep pressure between those naps, and actually need less sleep. Some of the big studies show that a lot of babies at this age are sleeping about 4 hours during the day, and about 9 to 10 hours overnight, inclusive of a few brief wakes and feeds. So a sleepy feed doesn't really subtract from that nighttime sleep, right? Because it's usually your nighttime sleep is being more negatively impacted. They're awake briefly and dozing back to sleep a lot of times. So obviously, if you had a baby who slept longer at night, they might sleep less during the day. I anecdotally do sometimes see babies doing quite fine with shorter amounts of naps, either because they're low sleep needs or because they are sleeping a bit of a longer night, right? And so there is a wide range of normal. And remember, these are always just the most typical, not like the full spread. But this is the time where you do hear that whole 7 to 7, 12-hour night. And I just want to remind folks that that's a myth. I think I've talked about it before in some of my podcast episodes. I talk about all the time, so sometimes I forget where I've talked about it. But babies generally do not sleep 12 hours overnight at any age, unless they are incredibly high sleep needs. The vast majority of babies are not going to do that. So it's not something you should be striving for. If you happen to have a baby that does it and sleeps well, cool. Of course, don't break something that doesn't need fixing. But it's not something we should be striving for with all babies. So 9 to 10 hours with brief wakes and feeds. Often around 3 months, we have maybe 4, maybe 5 naps if they're really short. And by the time we're at 6 months, most babies are ready, down to 3 naps. Maybe 4 if they're on the short side. So we have less total daytime sleep. We're dropping naps. We're spreading them out more during this time. And we have more distractible babies. Another thing we have is just a reminder that night feeds are happening during this time for the vast majority of babies, right? Still need those night feeds. And we tend to have a developmental sort of cluster around 4 months-ish. 4 months-ish. So if you've heard about the 4-month sleep regression, right? Regressions are a terrible word. Baby is not regressing. It's just whenever we go through a big developmental period of rapid change, sleep tends to get more disrupted. It's simply a fact. And then if we get a cluster of them together, that makes sense, right? We're going to have more disruption. And also sometimes the sleep cycle has a bit of a restructure during this time. It actually can be any time between 1 and 6 months. It's still shorter, but it goes from a really simple newborn sleep cycle that's active sleep, deep sleep, active sleep, deep sleep. We start getting some different non-REM, some NREM states differentiate. And so falling asleep can feel a bit different. So it restructures a bit. On top of things like bubbling and, learning to roll. And, a lot of folks are moving babies out of swaddles during this time because we tend to swaddle really long in this country. And that's a different conversation, right? And so there's a lot going on here that can make sleep tricky for a period of time for many families somewhere in here, right? Because 4-month sleep regression, which I don't like the terminology, but it's not like every baby at 4 months is what happens. It's usually somewhere in this period there is a tricky period with sleep when there's a lot of development happening and sleep gets more complicated for a period of time where baby's waking more frequently and needing more support to go down. And sometimes that's scheduling adjustments. Sometimes it's simply on the development side of things. Another area that I see families actually get ahead of themselves. So I talked about families either getting behind or being kind of a step behind or a step ahead. And they tend to be a step behind on how much sleep their baby needs. They tend to sometimes get a step ahead on sleep consolidation and predictability. Right? There's a lot of sleep change happening here. So even if you have a bit of a rhythm headed into this phase, it's going to change a lot. And so it's also really normal to not have much of a pattern headed into this phase or not have much of a rhythm. Again, this really comes back a lot to temperament and the rhythmicity, I can't say that word, of your baby, which is a temperament trait. And so people want these predictable schedules like we do. We're told we're supposed to have them, and we want them because it gives us a sense of control over something that feels very uncontrollable. But babies are still quite young, and their sleep is really changing. And like loosely speaking, the first 6 months are way more unpredictable than the second 6 months, right? So it's normal for there to still be quite a bit of shifting, right? With naps and where they are and how they distribute throughout the day. And it's also, really normal to still have quite a bit of waking, particularly if we're in the middle of that developmental sort of 4 months shenanigans where there's a lot going on. And not to be expecting a baby to consolidate or, do things that they're really just not ready for yet. So I think this is a really interesting time with sleep and also a really frustrating time with sleep because so much is changing and because it can be a really hard time to kind of feel like you're making headway, depending on what's going on. But it also can be a time where you can really practice the art of here's what's in my control, here's what's not, here's what I can do to make my life easier, and here's what I have to let go of in this phase because it is such a kind of an interesting and wild time with babies. So I'm sure I'm leaving something out because these are hard to sum up and feel like I'm gathering all the bits of information I want to share with you. But I hope you found this a helpful overview. And just like I said with the first one of these, if this is your phase and you found it helpful, I'm so happy. And if this is not where your baby's at, please do share it in new parent groups with your friends that have babies this age or will have a baby this age soon. Let's help normalize normal baby sleep together. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.